on slavery?
A strong
Well,
one. Not a strong one. I can't remember exactly what theirs was. And, well, it depends on whether we're talking about nationally, state, or local. But they were just trying to manage the factions and try to nominate candidates that would be acceptable to either side of their factions within the party. And the Democrats, however, they just went right out and had their factions for all to see. That is, in terms of the Bullheads and the Wildcats. Okay, I think, Elliot?
I have three questions. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask them all before I forget them.
Okay.
First, was there any logical connection that brought the anti-immigrants, the know-nothings, under the same tent as the advocates of temperance and anti-slavery? I mean, in modern terms, we would think of anti-slavery and temperance as being reform movements.
Yes.
You would think of anti-immigrant advocates as being sort of reactionary reforms. So is there a logical connection, or did they just, was it marriage of convenience? I guess that's my first question.
Marriage of convenience, I think, because the know-nothings tended to be somewhat of not the lowest status, but you know, they were workers who were concerned with their jobs and so on, at least in part. Others, but there was also a commonality in that evangelical preachers and members of evangelical churches were concerned with temperance. They were anti-slavery in the North, and they were concerned with the different culture that the immigrants were bringing that may have included acceptance of liquor. And so there was some kind of overlap.
Second question is certainly by the mid-1850s, Benjamin Bates, founded Bates, and many of the other large textile mills, was a very wealthy and influential man. Is there any indication that he was involved in the political goings-on in the 1850s? I know he was an advocate of temperance. I know he was involved with the endowment of Bates College, which at the time was a free will Baptist seminary. I don't know what his stand was on slavery, because he did need cotton from the South. So.
Yeah. I did not run across any evidence of his being involved in these local machinations. And the people in the 1850s, the people tended to be, who were involved in politics, tended to be from the older families of the community. So the mill agents, or those who ran the various mills, only come in to local politics later on, by about 1860, 61, 63, 2, 3. And that was kind of outside what I was looking at today. I'm not aware of his being involved in these local things. He just, as long as well, he was fairly tolerant of the taxes that the people were being were being levied. So
Well, he was a Boston guy, though. I mean, he spent
He
most
was,
of his
yeah,
time
he
in
was
Boston.
not here present, he wasn't here present.
Yeah, I understand he wasn't often present, but he could have exerted a lot of influence.
No, but I didn't, the names of the people,
Yeah.
the agents are not present in the newspapers anyway.
And finally, I'm sort of aware that in a lot of states, there were a few people who were prominent in forming the Republican Party, often newspaper publishers. In Maine, who were those people? Any of them from Androscoggin?
Oh, well, James B. Blaine was very important as a newspaper editor. Yes, the Lewiston Falls Journal was extremely in favor of temperance or prohibition, extremely against slavery. And the columns of the paper were devoted primarily to that point of view. And so it was Nelson Dingley. Nelson Dingley was the local editor. There were others associated with the paper, but his name stands out. So Nelson Dingley was very much involved. Yes.
About when was that requirement for the majority elections changed to just plurality?
No, I'm not really.
Well, outside this
It
period,
was-
or?
Oh, it's well after this period, because Alonzo Garcelon was elected governor, even though he came in third in the popular vote in 1879. And then again in 1880, it was still in, I know it was in, I think it's probably sometime in the 1880s, 90s that it was eliminated.
You mentioned the Know Nothing Party. How well organized were they here?
They weren't very organized here because they never really ran their own candidates locally. They were very important in certain communities, some along the coast, I think Bath and maybe
I'll say
Millbrook.
Richmond, Augusta
Richmond.
region was another area.
And of course, they did in fact win the gubernatorial election in Massachusetts. But at least in Androscoggin County, I did not really see any organized know-nothing party. They would endorse candidates and let that stay. Okay, well, I don't know how they're, okay, yes.
I was going to ask about voting practices and districting and the like. We're so accustomed now to 20th century phenomenon of districts of equal size, the secret ballot, and so on. And it was a rather different world in the mid-19th century. And towns and cities and counties were being formed, and the allocation of voting strength among counties, districts for the legislature and so on, how much of that influenced this kind of behavior we're talking about now?
Well, all of this negotiating could occur before, during, and after conventions, as we saw in the 1854 case. I'm not sure whether you're, but there were various
Well, I'm thinking that
practices that are quite different from today.
exactly to my point, that Danville was, I don't want to use the word absorbed, but
Annexed, absorbed, or
joined
Joined.
Auburn
joined Auburn.
a little later than
Kicking and
this.
screaming, yes.
And I heard reference to Poland, but there are currently a
All these other-
whole range of other towns in within Androscoggin County.
Yeah. Okay, well, Mechanic Falls was our most recent addition, in the 1890s, I believe it was.
And that was sort of from what my dad told me, because he grew up in Poland for a while, that Poland was tired of paying the taxes for the city folk, and so they let Mechanic Falls be a city by themselves, and so that Poland wouldn't have to pay all those high taxes.
Yeah, they were kind of a manufacturing center.
Yes.
Livermore Falls. It used to be Livermore and East Livermore. Well, East Livermore, and then became Livermore Falls at some point. And then there was the absorption of Danville. Androscoggin County formed in 1854. They weren't quite as concerned with equal population districts, although Maine wasn't too bad, except that you had to form the districts within the county. You could not go across county boundaries. And so sometimes towns were joined together that had no common boundary or anything. At one point, Lewiston and Wales were in a district, and they're not contiguous at all. Another practice was we had the Lewiston-Lisbon district in the 1840s, and those were all Lisbon people. I didn't say that then, but it wasn't terribly relevant, but it's relevant to your question. They took turns so that Lisbon would be sure that they would have their representatives for whatever their proportion of the time in the 1840s that they were entitled to. And Lewiston would have their proportion, and only Lewiston people would run in the other elections. You see what
Kind
I'm
of gentleman's
saying?
agreement thing.
I don't know whether they were gentlemen's agreements or whether it was by statute.
Backroom
I think it
politics.
was by statute. I think they had it by statute, that they would, the legislature would establish the districts, and in that same statute would indicate what percentage of the time, which elections would be Lewiston elections and which one would be Lisbon elections. But both towns would vote every year. So there are all those kinds of practices. There were no secret ballots. Okay, back up. The parties provided you with ballots or tickets. You would have the list of names on your Whig ticket handed to you by the party people who were patrolling the polls. And it would be pretty obvious, given the color of the paper and so forth, with whom you were voting. Or, if you wanted to split your ticket, the fact that you were splitting your ticket would become obvious. And so the secret or so-called Australian ballots didn't occur until the 1890s. And so your voting was quite a public affair.
Well, at one point, perhaps earlier, the selection of a representative to the state legislature was voted on at town meeting,
Yes.
open to all, and so people's vote was quite visible.
Yeah. Yes, as I said, these were held in town meetings. You had to appear at a certain time and place and cast your ballots. It wasn't something you did over several hours at your convenience. You've been very patient, and so I appreciate your questions and your attention. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much,